Although the Wehrmacht's offensive had been stopped, German intelligence estimated that Soviet forces had no more reserves left and thus would be unable to stage a counteroffensive. This estimate proved wrong, as Stalin transferred over 18 divisions, 1,700 tanks, and over 1,500 aircraft from Siberia and the Far East after learning that Imperial Japan had no plans to invade the USSR in the near future from Richard Sorge. The Red Army had accumulated a 58-division reserve by early December, when the offensive proposed by Zhukov and Vasilevsky was finally approved by Stalin. Even with these new reserves, Soviet forces committed to the operation numbered only 1,100,000 men, only slightly outnumbering the Wehrmacht. Nevertheless, with careful troop deployment, a ratio of 2-to-1 was reached at some critical points. On December 5, 1941, the counteroffensive for, removing the immediate threat to Moscow, started on the Kalinin front. The Northwestern Front and Western Fronts began their offensives the next day. After several days of little progress, Soviet armies retook Solnechnogorsk on December 12 and Klin on December 15. Guderian's army beat a hasty retreat towards Venov and then Sukhinichi. On December 8, Hitler had signed his Directive No. 39, ordering the Wehrmacht to assume a defensive stance on the whole front. German troops were unable to organize a solid defense at their initial locations and were forced to pull back to consolidate their lines. Guderian wrote that discussions with Hans Schmidt and Wolfram Freiherr von Richthofen took place the same day, and both commanders agreed the current front line could not be held. On December 14, Halder and Gunther von Kluge finally gave permission for a limited withdrawal to the west of the Oka, without Hitler's approval. On December 20th, Hitler cancelled the withdrawal and ordered his soldiers to defend every patch of ground. Guderian protested, pointing out that losses from cold were actually greater than combat losses and that winter equipment was held up by traffic ties in Poland. Nevertheless, Hitler insisted on defending the existing lines. And Guderian was dismissed by December 25th, along with Generals Hochner and Strauss, commanders of the 4th Panzer and 9th Army, respectively. Bach was also dismissed, officially for medical reasons. Brauchitsch had been removed even earlier, on December 19th. Meanwhile, the Soviet offensive continued in the north. The offensive liberated Kalinin and the Soviets reached Klin on December 7th, overrunning the headquarters of the 56th Panzer Corps outside the city. As the Kalinin front drove west, a bulge developed around Klin. As the Kalinin front drove west, a bulge developed around Klin. The Soviet front commander, Konyev, attempted to envelop any German forces remaining. Zhukov diverted more forces to the southern end of the bulge, to help Konyev trap the 3rd Panzer Army. But the Germans pulled their forces out in time. Although the encirclement failed, it unhinged the German defenses. A second attempt was made to outflank Army Group Center's northern forces, but met strong opposition near Rzhev and was forced to halt, forming a salient that would last until March 1943. In the south, the offensive went equally well, with southwestern front forces relieving Tula on December 16, 1941. A major achievement was the encirclement and destruction of the German 35th Corps, protecting Guderian's 2nd Panzer Army's southern flank. On January 4th, the skies cleared. The Luftwaffe was quickly reinforced, as Hitler hoped it would save the situation. The bomber squadrons KG-4 and KG-30 arrived from refitting in Germany, whilst 4 transport groups with a strength of 102 Junkers Ju-52 transports were deployed from Luftflotte 4 to evacuate surrounded army units and improve the supply line to the frontline forces. It was a last-minute effort and it worked. The German air arm was to help prevent a total collapse of Army Group Center. Despite the Soviets' best efforts, the Luftwaffe had contributed enormously to the survival of Army Group Center. Between the 17th and the 22nd of December, the Luftwaffe destroyed 299 motor vehicles and 23 tanks around Tula, hampering the Red Army's pursuit of the German army. In the center, Soviet progress was much slower. Soviet troops liberated Narofamensk only on December 26, Kaluga on December 28, and Maloyaroslavets on January 2, after 10 days of violent action. The Soviet reserves were annihilated, and the offensive halted on January 7, 1942, after having pushed the exhausted and freezing German armies back 62 to 155 miles from Moscow. Stalin continued to order more offensives in order to trap and destroy Army Group Center in front of Moscow. But the Red Army was exhausted and overstretched, and they failed. In any case, the outcome of this battle put an end to Hitler's hope of a fast victory. Furious that his army had been unable to take Moscow, Hitler dismissed Brauchitsch on December 19, 1941, and took personal charge of the Wehrmacht, effectively taking control of all military decisions. Hitler surrounded himself with staff officers with little or no recent combat experience. The Red Army's winter counteroffensive drove the Wehrmacht from Moscow. But the city was still considered to be threatened, with the front line relatively close. Because of this, the Moscow theater remained a priority for Stalin. On January 5, 1942, during a meeting in the Kremlin, Stalin announced that he was planning a general spring offensive, which would be staged simultaneously near Moscow, Leningrad, Kharkov, and the Crimea. This plan was accepted over Zhukov's objections. The defense of Moscow became a symbol of Soviet resistance against the invading Axis forces. To commemorate the battle, Moscow was awarded the title of Hero City in 1965, on the 20th anniversary of Victory Day. In Moscow, an annual military parade on Red Square on November 7th is held in honor of the October Revolution parade and as a substitute for the October Revolution celebrations that have not been celebrated on a national level since 1995. Both German and Soviet casualties during the Battle of Moscow have been a subject of debate. Chris Bellamy records Soviet losses as 926,224 irrecoverable and 1,806,123 between September 30th and April 20th, including the winter counteroffensive against Vyazma. The official Wehrmacht daily casualty reports show 35,757 killed in action, 128,716 wounded, and 9,721 missing in action for the entire Army Group Center between October 1, 1941 and January 10, 1942. However, this official report does not match, due to the normal accounting system was organized only in the middle of 1942. Historian Chris Bellamy estimates the Germans lost 581,000 troops and Soviets lost 1,029,234 troops, which included losses from the battles for Rzhev and Vyazma. In addition, the Wehrmacht lost 1,300 tanks, 2,500 guns, and more than 15,000 trucks and unarmored vehicles, mostly in their retreat from Moscow.